The sky was blindingly blue that morning, the kind of blue that makes you believe good things are coming. James stood at the edge of the gravel path, Sarah by his side, and Ethan dragging a duffel bag twice his size. Their smiles stretched wide as they stared up at the lake house, the house James once promised would be there forever. Then the door opened. An older man, gray-haired but sharp-eyed, stepped out onto the porch with a calm, polite smile. Beside him, a woman with silver-streaked curls and a floral apron stood holding 2 mugs of tea. "You must be James," the man said evenly. "And you must be Sarah." James blinked. Yeah. We're here to move in. This is our house." The man chuckled, slow and quiet. "Actually, no. This house isn't yours anymore. It was sold 3 weeks ago." "I should know, I'm the one who bought it." The duffel bag slipped from Ethan's shoulder. Sarah's mouth dropped open. James stared at them, confused. "There must be some mistake," he said. "My wife, Emily, she owned this house. I know that because I helped her find it." The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "There's no mistake, Mr. Bennett. Emily sold us this house herself. In fact, she left a message for you." She handed James a white envelope, sealed and pressed flat. His hands trembled as he opened it. 4 words were written in sharp ink. "You gave it away. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." 6 months earlier, Emily had fallen in love. Not with a person, but with a place, a 2-story cedar-shingled cottage nestled beside a still, glimmering lake. She'd found it during one of her long weekend drives, the kind she started taking after therapy sessions when the walls of their townhouse felt too narrow, too quiet, too hollow. The lake house felt different. Alive. Free. The real estate agent didn't think she'd go through with it. "You sure you don't want your husband here before signing, Mrs. Bennett?" he asked, glancing toward the door as if James might materialize at any moment to talk sense into her. But Emily had smiled, steady and quiet, and signed anyway. She didn't need James's permission to fall in love, not with this house, and not with herself. The kitchen had a crooked window that let in the sunrise. The guest room faced the lake. The walls were pale cream, waiting for stories to be hung. She envisioned pancakes on Sunday mornings, Ethan's laughter echoing down the hall during summer visits, and maybe, just maybe, a room for herself where no one would comment on her journals or the way she sang along to old music while cleaning. James had nodded approvingly when she brought him the keys. "It's cute," he'd said, peering around. "You've got a good eye." He didn't kiss her forehead like he used to. He didn't offer to help unpack. But he smiled that half-smile that said, "You've done well," and she clung to it like it meant something. She told herself it was stress. She told herself, he still loves me, even if his touches had grown mechanical and his compliments were fewer, colder. She told herself he was tired. That they would come alive again in the lake house. Back then, she was still hoping. But Emily didn't know that while she was picking curtains and writing down grocery lists for the cabin pantry, James was forwarding pictures of the property to someone else. Someone who, at the time, was still saved in his phone as Sarah R. Not Sarah, best friend. Not Sarah, Ethan's mom. Just Sarah. Neat. Simple. Like a secret he wasn't ready to admit. But secrets have a funny way of breathing under locked doors. And Emily was starting to hear them. Emily started noticing the signs the way you notice a small leak, slow, quiet, and almost easy to ignore until the floor starts to rot. It began with the laughter. James never used to laugh like that around her anymore. But when he was on the phone with Sarah, the sound would come tumbling out of him like a boy on summer break. Carefree. Effortless. It made Emily pause in the hallway one evening, holding a laundry basket, just to listen. "You're terrible," he said, chuckling. Then quieter, "No, don't say that. You're gonna get me in trouble." Emily didn't ask. Not yet. She remembered how once, years ago, she'd questioned a woman's name on his phone. He'd snapped, told her not to become one of those women, the insecure kind. She'd apologized for even thinking it. She'd promised herself not to be that wife. So she said nothing when James started spending weekends at the office. Said nothing when he came home smelling like peppermint, a scent she hadn't worn in years. Said nothing when he suggested they let Sarah and Ethan spend a few weeks at the lake house. Just until they get back on their feet, he added, kissing the top of her head as if she were a pet. Emily blinked. A few weeks? She and Ethan have been couch surfing. It's just temporary. And you said yourself, we bought the place to share it, right? She hadn't said that. She'd said it would be nice to host people someday. James waved off her hesitation. You're amazing, Em. You're kind. That's why I love you. So she nodded. Because if she said no, she'd be selfish. Cold. Jealous. And for weeks after that, she really tried, to believe she was being dramatic. But then Sarah moved in like a soft invasion. First it was a toothbrush in the guest bathroom. Then her shampoo in the master. Emily noticed her hairbrush on her side of the sink. A new pair of flip-flops by the front door, size 8 with red straps. She'd never worn red. Then one evening, Emily came home early from town and found Sarah in the bedroom, folding James's laundry. Her hands were slow, practiced. Like she'd done it 100 times before. Oh, Sarah said, not startled at all. Didn't expect you back so soon. Emily looked down at the shirts, the familiar cologne on the collar. She swallowed. It's still my house, she said gently. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course it is. But Emily already knew. It wasn't. Not anymore. It was a Thursday evening when James uttered the sentence that finally cracked something open inside her. We need to talk, he said, standing in the doorway like a man who had already made his decision. Sarah and Ethan, they're moving in. Full time. Emily was sitting at the small writing desk in the den, sorting through a stack of handwritten recipes from her late grandmother. Her hands froze mid-turn. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked up slowly, her face calm, too calm. Moving in, she repeated. James shifted, as if uncomfortable in his own skin. It just makes sense. Ethan needs stability. Sarah's working full-time now, but she can't afford her own place yet. The lake house has plenty of space. Emily blinked once, then turned her gaze back to the recipe card. It was her grandmother's peach cobbler, the one she hadn't made since the miscarriage. Did you ever think to ask me? She said softly. I'm telling you now, he replied. You're not unreasonable, Emily. You're the most empathetic person I know. You get it. He smiled, as if her agreement was already in his pocket. Emily stood up. Not quickly. Not dramatically. She just rose to her feet and looked him full in the face. Do you love her? She asked. James flinched, barely perceptible. I don't. What does that even mean, right now? It's not about love. It's about circumstances. She let out a breath. It wasn't quite a sigh. More like release. You already chose, she said. Now I will too. That night, Emily didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she sat by the kitchen window long after the moon rose, looking out at the lake, at the stillness of the water. And slowly, a plan began to take shape. Not out of revenge. Not out of anger. But out of clarity. Because finally, she saw it all for what it was. Emily didn't act right away. That wasn't her style. Instead, she folded into herself like paper, quiet and watchful. She smiled at the dinner table, cleaned up after everyone, even helped Ethan with his science project. She kept the house running as if nothing had changed, as if she weren't walking through the ashes of a life that used to be hers. But at night, when the lights were out and James snored beside her, she'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence press down on her like a weight. And one evening, while washing dishes, she picked up James's phone by mistake, at least that's what she told herself. The screen lit up with a message from Sarah. "Still can't believe she hasn't figured it out. You're a terrible liar, but so hot when you try. I could get used to waking up here every day." Emily stood still, her hands dripping soapy water into the sink. She didn't read more. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked into the bedroom and opened James's laptop. His password was still the same. Their wedding date. That somehow hurt more than the messages. She clicked through emails, photos, threads. She saw them all, the selfies Sarah had sent from her bathroom, the ones from inside Emily's bathroom. Notes about Ethan's new school, her address listed on the paperwork. And one particularly unforgettable message where James referred to Emily as the white whale, mocking her weight, her sensitivity, her fragile ego. Her hands trembled. Then stopped. The sadness drained out of her body like water from a broken cup. In its place came something else. Fire. But not the kind that burns houses down. The kind that rebuilds. She didn't scream. She didn't confront him. That would only give him power. No. She had something better in mind. She picked up the phone. "Hi, Mom. I think I'm ready now." Her mother didn't ask for explanations. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply said, "Come over," and had tea ready when Emily arrived. Lauren was the kind of woman who had survived too much to flinch anymore. She'd buried a husband, lost a child, and rebuilt a life from the scraps. And when Emily finished telling her everything, about Sarah, about James, about the cruel words and the way she no longer recognized the man she once loved, Lauren just nodded. "Then you already know what to do," she said, pouring more tea. "You don't need to stay and prove your worth to someone who's already decided not to see it." "But I bought that house," Emily whispered. "It was mine. It was supposed to be my fresh start." Lauren reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Then maybe it's still your fresh start. Just, not in the way you thought." And that's when the plan began. It started with a realtor. A quiet, efficient woman named Tanya who didn't ask why Emily wanted the sale handled discreetly. Then came Paul and Grace Robinson. They weren't just interested buyers, they were kind. Grace had eyes that twinkled with stories, and Paul had the slow, careful demeanor of a man who'd learned not to rush important things. They'd been married for 42 years, had raised 3 kids, and were looking for a place to retire by the water. When Emily showed them the lake house, Grace touched her arm gently and said, "It's beautiful. Feels like a home already." Emily smiled, but her eyes were tired. "That's what I thought, too." She didn't tell them everything, just enough. Paul understood without needing details. "If you need us to play along for a little while," he said, "we can do that." Grace nodded. Some people deserve to be gently reminded they can't steal everything. Emily blinked back tears. "Thank you. I want to leave without screaming. I want to walk away clean." Grace squeezed her hand. "Then walk, sweetheart. Let us handle the front porch." The papers were signed. The house was sold. Emily left the set of keys inside a drawer, along with a note addressed simply. "To the man who mistook possession for love, this is what freedom looks like." She took nothing but her clothes, her journals, and a battered hardcover copy of Jane Eyre. Everything else? She left behind. James pulled into the gravel driveway with a grin on his face and a plan in his head. Sarah sat beside him in the passenger seat, sunglasses perched on her nose, scrolling through Pinterest boards labeled Lake House Aesthetic. Ethan was asleep in the back seat, a hoodie pulled over his head, his duffel bag tucked under one arm. The sun was golden, reflecting off the still water like glass. Birds chirped in the trees. Everything looked exactly the way James remembered, except this time, he was in charge. He parked the car, stepped out, stretched like a king returning to his castle. Sarah followed, smoothing her blouse and nudging Ethan awake. "This is it," James said, sweeping an arm toward the house. "Our new beginning." They walked up the steps, bags in tow. He pulled the keys from his pocket, Emily hadn't asked for them back, and slid one into the lock. It didn't turn. He frowned, tried again. Nothing. Behind the door, footsteps. The door opened. A tall man with neatly combed silver hair and a calm expression stood in the frame. He wore a soft blue sweater and held a mug in one hand. "Afternoon," he said. "Can I help you?" James blinked. Yeah. I think there's been a mistake. This is our house." The man raised an eyebrow. "No, sir. This house was sold 3 weeks ago. My wife and I bought it." Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp. "That can't be right. Emily Bennett owns this house. She's my..." She hesitated. The man waited. She was the owner," James cut in, correcting quickly. "But she wouldn't just sell it. Not without telling me." At that moment, the woman appeared behind the man. Grace, warm and poised, holding a second mug. "You're James," she said gently. "And you must be Sarah." James froze. "Yes. How do you?" She stepped forward and handed him a white envelope. His name was written on the front in familiar, looping cursive. "James." His throat tightened. He opened it slowly. Inside, a single line. "You gave it away." James stared at the words, trying to swallow something that wouldn't go down. Sarah was speaking, but he barely heard her. Ethan looked up at him, confused. The man, Paul, cleared his throat. "I believe that note answers your question. You should probably go." Sarah hissed, "This is insane. She can't just..." But James wasn't listening anymore. He turned around and looked at the lake. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. Emily didn't answer his calls. Not the first one, not the 5th, not the 23rd. Each voicemail from James grew shorter, more frantic. First confusion. Then anger. Then desperation. He tried guilt. He tried charm. He tried crying. But the silence on the other end was louder than all his words. She listened to exactly none of them. Instead, she sat in her new apartment, small, sunlit, and hers. She brewed tea in the mornings and left the windows open. Her phone sat face down on the counter, and every time it buzzed, she let it. Freedom had a sound, she realized. It was not responding. A week later, the email came. Subject line, "Please, just meet me once." From James Bennett. To Emily Bennett. She stared at it for a long time. Then, against her better judgment, or maybe because she wanted to look him in the eyes when she said goodbye, she replied. 1 hour. Downtown. You pick the place. He was already there when she arrived. He looked older. Not in the way years age a man, but in the way guilt and consequences do. His hair wasn't brushed, his shirt wrinkled, a ring of coffee on the table in front of him. Emily walked in wearing navy slacks and a crisp white blouse. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like someone who knew who she was again. James stood awkwardly. "You look great." She sat. Didn't return the compliment. "I didn't know," he said after a beat. "I didn't think you'd actually sell the house." She tilted her head. "You didn't think I'd walk away after you brought your girlfriend into my kitchen and let her fold your socks in my bedroom?" James flushed. "It wasn't like that." "No," she said. "Then explain it to me." He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Things were broken between us. For a long time. You know that." Emily smiled. Cold and clear. "You didn't fix things. You filled them." He tried again. "Can't we just..." "I don't know." Find some way to make this less ugly? Maybe figure out how to divide the rest of it, money, the accounts, fairly? She leaned forward. I already did. Fair would have been walking away with half. But I didn't want half. I wanted peace. You can keep the money, James. Keep the car. Keep your empty, echoing ego. He looked stunned. What do you want, then? She stood up, calmly. To never explain myself to you again. And with that, she walked away, leaving behind the man who had once made her feel small, and carrying only the strength he never thought she had. Move on to part 9. ChatGPT to NOI. 6 months passed like pages in a book she had finally chosen to write herself. Emily's new apartment was modest but warm, with pale curtains that danced in the morning breeze and shelves lined with books, journals, and little trinkets from antique shops she now loved to visit alone. She joined a watercolor class on Thursdays. Started walking by the river at sunrise. Even got a library card again. Her body changed, not because she punished it, but because she finally started listening to it. She moved with purpose, cooked for joy, and no longer ate in secret. She didn't shrink herself, didn't hide her laughter, didn't apologize when she took up space. And then, one day, her phone buzzed. The message was simple. Hi, I hope this isn't strange. I'm Kevin, Paul and Grace's son. My parents told me a little about you. I just wanted to say thank you. For what you gave them. That house changed their lives. Emily stared at the screen for a moment. Then smiled. She replied. They messaged for days. Weeks. Their conversations were easy, like old friends learning new versions of each other. They talked about books, about music, about the ache of betrayal and the strange peace that follows it. About lake water and forgiveness. Their first coffee date was quiet and warm. Kevin had kind eyes, a quiet voice, and a way of listening that made her feel heard in a way James never had. There was no grand gesture. No promises. Just two people sitting across from each other, both learning how to begin again. As winter turned to spring, their meetings became regular. Walks in the park. Movie nights. Even a weekend trip to a local vineyard, where Kevin reached for her hand and didn't let go. I'm not in a rush, he said one evening. We've got time, Emily. All the time in the world. And she believed him. For the first time in years, she let herself believe. It was a sunny Saturday when Kevin turned to her over brunch and said, almost casually, I'd love for you to meet my parents sometime. I think they'd really like to see who's been making me smile so much. Emily hesitated only a second. You sure? Kevin laughed. They already adore you. They just don't know it's you. She raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He shrugged, grinning. They've been talking about the woman who sold them the lake house for months. Said she had grace. Said she left behind more than furniture, she left behind peace. Emily stared at him, a strange feeling rising in her chest. Wait, she said slowly. Your parents, what are their names? Paul and Grace Robinson, he answered, sipping his coffee like it was the most ordinary name in the world. Emily nearly dropped her fork. Kevin, she said, eyes wide, I know them. It took him a moment. And then it hit him. You're the Emily? She nodded, laughing now, half in shock, half in disbelief. I sold them that house. Kevin blinked, then let out a breathy laugh, pushing his plate aside. Of course. Of course. I told them about you, and they kept saying, Emily this, and Emily that, and I didn't even put it together. Emily leaned back in her chair, eyes shining. They were part of the plan. The beginning of it, actually. Well, he said, his voice soft, maybe they're part of the next chapter too. Later that week, she rode with Kevin down winding country roads, trees blooming on either side. And when they turned onto the familiar gravel driveway, Emily felt her heart catch, not from pain, but from something that felt suspiciously like joy. Grace opened the door with a surprised laugh. "Emily?" Paul stepped out, eyes lighting up. "Well, this is unexpected." Kevin stood between them, grinning like a boy with the best secret. Emily looked around, at the porch swing, at the lake glittering in the sun, at the home that used to break her heart. And now? Now it made her whole. The dining room was filled with golden light, laughter, and the clinking of forks against china. Emily sat beside Kevin, across from Paul and Grace, a warm fire crackling in the hearth behind them. It was simple: roast chicken, fresh bread, a bottle of wine, but to Emily, it felt like a feast. Grace poured her another glass and grinned. "We always said you had good taste in homes. Looks like you've got good taste in men too." Kevin flushed, but Emily only smiled. "I didn't expect to be back here like this." Paul leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Funny thing about life, it gives you what you need, just not always when or how you thought you'd get it." After dinner, they walked down to the lake. Emily stood at the edge of the dock, shoes in hand, toes skimming the cool water. Kevin came up beside her, silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you ever think about the past? About him?" Emily turned her face to the water. "Sometimes. But it doesn't sting the way it used to. The pain doesn't own me anymore." He nodded, slipping his hand into hers. "I'm glad you came back. Not just to the house, but to yourself." She squeezed his fingers. "Me too." A year later, Emily and Kevin stood beside a different lake, in a quieter town, under a canopy of willow trees. There were no big crowds, just the people who mattered. Grace wiped tears from her cheeks. Paul toasted with cider. Emily wore a soft blue dress, and Kevin couldn't stop smiling. They didn't exchange vows about perfection or promises to never falter. Instead, they promised honesty, respect, space to grow, room to fail, and the courage to try again. Afterward, they danced barefoot on the grass, the air thick with summer and second chances. In time, they bought a cottage of their own. Not grand, not magazine-worthy, but theirs. Filled with books and laughter, old photographs, and coffee mugs with chipped rims. Emily turned one room into an art studio. Kevin cooked Sunday breakfasts. They visited Paul and Grace often, bringing soup and stories and, eventually, a baby girl named June. One morning, Emily stood at the window, holding June against her chest. Outside, the lake shimmered, different from the old one, but just as quiet, just as full of reflection. She kissed her daughter's head and whispered, "Sometimes we lose a dream so we can find a better one." And this time, she knew, this dream was hers. Fully. Freely. Finally. Emily's story isn't just about betrayal, it's about reclaiming power with grace, and building a life on her own terms. What would you have done in her place? Do you believe she made the right call? Comment number 2 if you think she won, or number 7 if you think it went too far. We want to hear your take. And if you love powerful real-life stories like this, like, comment, and subscribe to EN True Tales, because the next video might just be the story you need to hear. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes, walking away is the most powerful thing you can do.